Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Austin Petersen here, former presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. Thanks for tuning in to the Freedom Report podcast. Now, a word from our sponsors. Will America survive its next election or let two-party corruption collapse the country into a second civil war? Blood Republic is a new political thriller which details what happens when the Electoral College ties and both parties claim victory. Blood Republic by James R. Duncan is available for download or in paperback on Amazon. Thanks so much for listening to my show today. Very exciting to be doing these podcasts and having such an enormous audience. It's just really a dream come true for me. I get to talk about the news and to report on all of the exciting things that happen in the liberty movement and share my love for the principles of economic freedom and personal liberty with, I think we're looking at 100,000 downloads per episode. The last episode got 200,000 downloads. It's absolutely amazing to me that with this technology, I can reach out and touch you if you're listening to your car, you're on your iPhone or whatever. I mean, I just want to say thanks so much for being a part of this show, because if you're a listener right now, then you're helping to build the next generation of libertarian media here at the Libertarian Republic. And I'm very grateful for you as a listener, for being a downloader, for being a subscriber. So thanks very much. The big news today. We've got lots of exciting announcements, and I want to save some of the big announcements for later today. Today is September the 12th, and around 4:30 p.m. Central Time today, I'm going to do a live stream about Hillary Clinton and the history of presidential ailments. Because I don't want to focus too much in on her health directly. You know, she's a human being. Donald Trump came out today and had a really nice statement about Hillary, saying that he hopes that she gets better soon. And my girlfriend reminded me yesterday, she's a mom, so don't be don't be licking your lips with glee, because, there are people who rely on Hillary, who love her. She's a human being and not a reptilian, as much as some of you guys might like to say. And so, let's remember our humanity, of course. But it is a campaign subject. It is a campaign issue. When you're sick on the campaign trail, that's a big deal. Certainly as a former presidential candidate, I know, I've got to be healthy out there on the campaign team. People said specifically they want a healthy president. So we'll discuss the implications of that later in my live stream, where I do have some big announcements. But for my audio listeners today, for my loyal audio listeners, I've got a new show for you today. I got to start doing 2 shows a day. I used to have to only do 1 show a day, and then I uploaded the video to the audio, and that's what you guys got. But now, because this is growing so much, I can't get away with that. So I've got some exclusive content for you today in our live stream. I'll get right to it. We're talking about North Korea today. They recently shot off a nuke. They recently exploded a nuke, and there's all sorts of developments in this story because Barack Obama is sort of flexing his muscles, saying that the United States will never recognize North Korea as a nuclear state. And it's kind of funny because obviously the truth is that North Korea already is a nuclear state. And I'd like to talk to you today about the news portion of this, but then I'd like to get a little bit into the history of the Korean War, read to you all a little bit from some history that I've been reading about the Koreas. Really, what's funny is that we think of North Korea, South Korea, but the Koreans all still, even though they're divided, they see themselves as one people. Both sides see themselves as eventually reunifying, and it's a hot spot for international politics, foreign policy. There's all sorts of national security questions involved. I mean, certainly they have a hostile government who spends billions. They spend billions. This is a poor hermit kingdom that is a declared communist state, but really just a de facto totalitarian state controlled by the dynasty. But the North Koreans and the South Koreans see themselves as one people. And the implications of that are that I think eventually everyone knows that North Korea at some point through either war or through attrition will collapse. And what does that mean for American national security? What does that mean for China? What does it mean for Japan? So let's talk a little bit about the latest news on North Korea. First off, let's just talk about the nuclear test, because South Korea is saying they are preparing for a worst case scenario with North Korea. On CNN.com, latest update, South Korea announced they're getting ready for the worst case scenario, the country's defense ministry said Monday, after North Korea claimed last week to have tested a nuclear warhead. World leaders have lined up to condemn the blast, which was North Korea's second this year and likely its most powerful to date. South Korea believes Kim Jong-un is preparing to hit the button on another test. We assess that North Korea is prepared for a nuclear test in another shaft, Defense Minister Han Min-koo told lawmakers Friday. His spokesman said Monday if another nuclear test happened, it could come from a second or third site. South Korea is preparing to resume propaganda broadcasts on the border from sometime in November. And apparently what's going on is that there's a war of words and an escalation happening between the two nations due to the nuclear test because it's seen as a provocation. That North Korea had signed a non-proliferation treaty. Of course, they're breaking these rules, and it's important for us to figure out how can we as libertarians, people who believe in freedom, who believe in liberty, deal with issues of the North Koreans. I mean, we are non-interventionists, right? We want to stay the hell out of it. The problem is that what we want and what we have are two different things. So how do we get from the entanglements that we have, the international entanglements, how do we get from those to a situation of peace in the Korean Peninsula? Does that mean that it needs to be reunification? Does that mean if they threaten us with nuclear weapons, then we go to war? And that's the question that we have to ask ourselves, is from a moral and tactical, there's a moral perspective and then there's a tactical perspective. And we have to look at this objectively from all angles. True libertarians, you've got to have your principle of non-intervention. But then if you really want to be serious, if you really want to advance your principles, you're going to need to figure out how to deal with this. One time I was having a conversation with an anarcho-capitalist friend of mine, and we were debating about whether or not the United States should ever get involved militarily with North Korea again. And I like to play devil's advocate. I may be a non-interventionist, but I like to call BS on myself and say, okay, play devil's advocate in this situation, or play neocon in this situation, because if you want to have a national defense, right, if you want to have a legitimate national defense that goes towards libertarianism, you've got to have some sort of a strategy. And certainly as a candidate for president of the United States this year, these are the kinds of things that I would think of, scenarios in my head. I wasn't getting national security briefings. Yes, I do know what Aleppo is, but it's important for me to stay sharp on these issues so that I can understand if I had been the leader of the free world. If you didn't know and you're listening to this show that I ran for president, then I don't know what to tell you. So anyways, I have a unique insight into sort of how the planning for these goes, because I conducted my own national security briefings, but I did have military advisors actually that I would go and ask questions to in order to formulate the proper military policy. But one day I was having a debate with one of my anarchist friends, and we were discussing the North Korea situation, and I said, "Pop quiz, hotshot. North Korea puts a nuke on the launch pad. They have the ability to reach the American West Coast, which is true. They could hit Alaska. They could hit Washington, potentially southern Los Angeles. Now, we know that their missile guided systems are problematic. Like, at best, they might hit Japan if they really wanted to, but they would be obliterated in a second. But when it comes to national defense of the United States, if we've got a problem in Alaska, if they're going to try and nuke Alaska, well, we're going to have a problem there. And so we need to have a debate as libertarians. How can we deal with this kind of a threat? And Gary Johnson has actually been out front on this. Gary Johnson has been going I wouldn't say rattling the sabers, but he is signaling that North Korea is a serious threat. And I believe him. I agree with him on that. Gary Johnson and I, we have some policy differences and things like that. I don't know if this is one of them. I mean, we were actually asked in the Las Vegas debate with Penn and Teller, or Penn Jillette, when we were talked about what are the greatest threats to the United States, what are the greatest threats to our country? And Gary Johnson said North Korea. And I said the U.S. federal government. That's why I didn't get the nomination. It's a little too wild. But when it comes to North Korea, I was discussing with my anarchist friend the nuclear launch pad scenario. So let's say that they're getting ready to nuke Alaska. You're the president. You're the commander in chief. What do? He says nothing. I go, well, what do you mean nothing? He goes, well, I would just wait. And I'm like, okay, so here's, I kind of tightened the scenario down, and I said to him, okay, so let's say that North Korea has the missile on the launch pad. They've stated it intently, that they intend to nuke Alaska or Los Angeles. What do you do? And he says, well, it's a threat. We just not intervene. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm thinking to myself in my head, like on a person-to-person scenario, like if you point a loaded gun at me and say you're going to shoot me, what would I do in that situation? Well, apply that to international politics. Because if the NAP applies to international politics, then you can apply person-to-person scenarios to international conflicts. Sorry, if I'm not trying to be pedantic here, I'm just trying to keep, my own people intellectually honest, and we need a real debate. But I'm playing devil's advocate here, and I said, so they've intended to nuke California. They've put the missile on the launch pad. They haven't fired it yet, but they claim to, and the launch phase begins, and all of a sudden they launch the missile. So they've launched the missile, and the nuke is now heading towards Southern California. And my anarchist friend says, well, then I would blow it out of the sky. And I had to just kind of laugh and say, with what Air Force? What does your anarchist state have an Air Force? Just curious. I'm not saying who will build the roads when it comes to the military, but I mean, at some point you have to say, here's what we got, which is this scenario. And then in your situation, I don't know if we would have an anarchist. It does get a little tricky. And again, I play devil's advocate on my statist tendencies too. I mean, I consider myself a constitutional libertarian, which, means I'm not an anarchist. But when it comes, I don't even believe in driver's license. Some of you will get that joke. But when it comes to the military, when it comes to national defense, the question of North Korea is a serious one of national defense. It is a serious question of international politics and diplomacy, because if North Korea, if there isn't a war with North Korea, if nuclear saber rattling doesn't lead to a conflict, of which I am fairly certain that North Korea would lose, then I see them as collapsing. Essentially, that the Un dynasty would collapse, and that all of a sudden the crisis would change. It would become a humanitarian crisis. It already is a humanitarian crisis. The entire country of North Korea is just one big crisis. And oh man, almost knocked my water over there. That would have been nasty during a show. But the entire I'm like gesticulating wildly. You can't see me because this isn't my video show, but I'm making all these big wild gestures as I talk to kind of keep the energy up. But when it comes to the issue of North Korea and how it should be handled, if it goes the second way, rather than war, if the North Korean state, the dynasty, ends not in war, but in a just complete collapse, perhaps riots, finally an overrun, maybe a murdering of the Un dynasty, like a military coup, which we should have been happening a long time ago for all intents and purposes. If it ends in a humanitarian crisis, that means that they're going to have refugees. You think that people hate on refugees now when they're Muslims. Just wait until they're Koreans. If you think that it's bad in the United States now, the anti-immigrant sentiment. Although, the funny thing about racism in the United States when it comes to immigration is that it is very selective. We don't like Mexicans. We don't like Muslims. But if it's other countries, if they're Asian, certain Asian countries that are like Taiwanese, oh yeah, bring them in, because we love Taiwan. But to me, I think when it comes to the North Korean issue, you need a real big, you need soft power, hard power, basic soft power, hard power solution. You got to have the big stick. North Korea has to believe that the United States is a threat. I mean, I think they do, but they have to believe that there will be consequences to their behavior if they make threats. Put that on a one-to-one scenario, okay? Now, Obama, I think, in some sense, is acting instinctually from the right position. The president is saying that we will not tolerate North Korea as a nuclear state. But they already are a nuclear state. Your words matter when you're president of the United States, and you have to choose your words carefully. So the president is making a mistake in the way that he frames this argument. It's not that we will not tolerate them as a nuclear state. It's that they are a nuclear state, and they better check themselves before they wreck themselves. Diplomacy, soft power, hard power, right? Hard power is the actual military sanctions, the actual sanctions that might occur. Hard power is the actual violent consequences that occur, like an actual war. Soft power being our diplomacy. But when it comes to the saber rattling, when it comes to the threats, we want to eventually see peace in North Korea and South Korea. So where are the doves, right? What are the doves saying? I mean, most of the doves in my community are just going to say, don't intervene, pull all the troops out of Korea and walk away. Well, I'm ready to have that discussion, absolutely, as soon as they stop, blowing up nukes and threatening to kill us. That might be a discussion we can move towards soon, and that's the one that I want to be having, but that's not the one the world is having. And let's just talk a little bit about the history of the Korean War, because it's important to have an understanding of the history of, if you're into politics, and of course you are, because you're listening to this show for political nerds who also like to have, listen to someone who has a little bit of personality, isn't just a dry, rote recitation of the facts, although that's what we're getting ready to do here. This is from history.com, the Korean War. This is is good history nerd fodder. Here we go. Actually, let me just see if I can pull this up for you guys. All right. Yes, here we are. The history of the Korean War. History of the Korean War began when some 75,000 soldiers from the North Korean People's Army poured across the 38th parallel, the boundary between the Soviet-backed Democratic People's Republic of Korea to the north and the pro-Western Republic of Korea to the south. This invasion was the first military action of the Cold War. By July, American troops had entered the war on South Korea's behalf. As far as American officials were concerned, it was a war against the forces of international communism itself. After some early back and forth across the 30th parallel, the fighting stalled and casualties mounted with nothing to show for them. Meanwhile, American officials worked anxiously to fashion some sort of armistice with the North Koreans. The alternative, they feared, would be a wider war with Russia and China, or even, as some warned, World War III. In July of '53, the Korean War came to an end. In all, some 5 million soldiers and civilians lost their lives during the war. The Korean Peninsula is still divided today. And think about that. 5 million people. And it's a forgotten war in many respects. It's not the wars that we really spend a lot of time. It's one of the wars that we spend studying in school, but we might actually. That could change. History sometimes becomes more relevant as events unfold into the future. And as we are now here at the present day, the history of the Korean War could become very, very relevant to the citizens of the United States. So I hope that you consider this. And it's funny that Harry S. Truman is the only Missouri president that we've ever had, and here I live in Kansas City, where he's an icon. And so it's very interesting that North Korea comes up, and then we see Harry Truman, who played a pivotal role in the Korean conflict. And I learned quite a bit from Harry Truman. He's got a museum out here that I want to go to with some of my friends. If you're a Kansas City native and you're around here, like Stapleton or my buddies, maybe we should do a libertarian field trip to go see old Harry Truman and learn a little bit more about our heritage, especially because, we might be forming a government one day as president of the United States. But if the best minds in the world had set out to find the worst possible location in the world to fight this damnable war, U.S. Secretary of State Dean Acheson once said, the unanimous choice would have been North Korea. The peninsula had landed in America's lap almost by accident. Since the beginning of the 20th century, Korea had been a part of the Japanese Empire, and after World War II, it fell to the Americans and the Soviets to decide what should be done with their enemies' imperial possessions. In August of '45, two young aides at the State Department divided the Korean peninsula. Two young aides at the State Department divided the Korean peninsula in half along the 30th parallel. Russians occupied the area north, and the United States occupied the area to the south. By the end of the decade, two new states had formed on the peninsula. In the south, the anti-communist dictator Syngman Rhee enjoyed the reluctant support of the American government. In the north, the communist dictator Kim Il-sung enjoyed the slightly more enthusiastic support of the Soviets. Neither dictator was content to remain on his side of the 38th parallel, however, and border skirmishes were common. Nearly 10,000 North and South Korean soldiers were killed in battle before the war even began. So the Korean War and the Cold War were intertwined. It was really the beginning of the Cold War where there were actual conflicts, actual violent conflicts. If we let Korea down, President Harry Truman said, the Soviets will keep right on going and swallow up one place after another. And Truman was right. That is very true. The Soviet Empire was an expansive empire. It's funny because they were on the march against what was imperialism, and they matched it. Game, set, match for them. It was all about imperialism for the Soviets. They went and turned. The British Empire died at the expense of the Soviet Empire. I mean, was that really in the Americans' best interest? Think about that, because after World War II, everybody demanded that the British Empire be ripped apart. In the meantime, this came at the expense of the Soviet Empire, and the Soviet Empire expanded, and we've had nothing but trouble because of the hostilities with that country ever since, and we still have negative relations with Russia in many ways, or at least tense relations with Russia. China has become a major trading partner, but we still, unfortunately, have soldiers on the DMZ in Korea in the 38th parallel. So if it comes down to it, the question of the history of the Koreas is, was it proper for us to intervene? Well, ask yourself this question. South Korea, perfect example of free market capitalism after the conflict, where the United States supported a more free market approach. And look at North Korea. It was the picture of communism. And look at the two Koreas. I mean, doesn't that paint a picture to you, ladies and gentlemen? Think about that. If you ever have people asking you whether or not freedom really works, or if you have someone who doesn't understand how liberalism in markets, real liberalism, classical liberalism, not socialism like most social democrats, not what North Korea did, but through free markets and through individualism, a philosophy of individualism applied to governance. South Korea is a great example of that. And you can't argue the contrary. I mean, even the most hardcore, even an isolationist, must bow to the reality of South Korea and the miraculous success. So the South Koreans are all very happy that the United States intervened. Of course, did the American taxpayer have to foot the bill to free South Koreans? Is it our job to liberate Iraqis? Is it our job to liberate Syrians in Aleppo? What is the role of the government of the United States? This is the libertarian question, because there is the consequentialist approach, which says, hey, look what happened with South Korea. But then there is the principle of non-interventionism that I think we must adhere to, or at least we must guide ourselves to. We have a very interventionist government now, but how can we have a more non-interventionist government, and one that would allow the flourishing of free markets and free trade? You must resist communism, and sometimes you must resist communism violently. Absolutely. A violent ideology must be resisted with violence, because violence only responds to violence. That is just the truth. Not all of us are pacifists. So if someone, don't tread on me means what it means. It means don't tread on me. So any dictator, I don't care, North Korean, South Korean, if you're trying to eliminate my rights or eliminate individualism, then I say it's war. Be it better to die on my feet than on my knees. Much better to never give in to tyranny. Tuna cede malus, sed contra audentior ito. Do not give in to evil, but proceed ever more boldly against it. Thanks very much for listening to my audio podcast today. Do you listen to LibertarianRepublic.com's podcast frequently? Do you go to our website? If you do, sometimes you get a lot of ads, and I'm actually working to transition away from an advertising model such as it is on the website, where it's a little bit loaded down, because what we do right now is we sell memberships to people who want to get rid of the ads. That's a great business model, but hopefully in the future what we're going to do is we're going to move over to like selling of merchandise. You got to have a huge audience to make money doing this, guys, and it's a struggle for me, and I'm trying to feed the mouths of my children's, Liberty Laura's and Josh Gukert's and libertarian leaders, trying to give people jobs. If you like libertarian journalism like what you're hearing right now, and you like libertarian commentary, help support it. If you go to libertarianrepublic.com, you'll get a pop-up, and there's also a little ad on the right sidebar that says, you can subscribe for $5 a month. Really easy. $5 a month, guys, or you can do a year for $55. Save a $5, save a monthly fee. You get a month free. $55 for the year at thelibertarianrepublic.com. You get an ad-free experience. And you know how when you read our lists, you go through a slideshow, rather than going through a slideshow, you get all those on one page. This is how we can afford to continue to bring you quality journalism and op-eds and opinions like you get every single day. So do us a favor and subscribe. Also, we've got some great news coming out of the Stonegate Institute, my new free market institution for kids who don't liberty good and who want to learn how to do other stuff good too. So if you guys want to learn more about that, tune in to my live stream today. It is the 12th of September, or if you're listening to an archive of this episode, you can go back to my Facebook page and see on this day in history, Austin Petersen's announcement on the Stonegate Institute. Lots of really cool stuff, and I'll be talking about the presidents and their history of health. The history of health of presidential candidates, because it's big in the news that Hillary Clinton, she'd be fainting everywhere up in here. So thanks very much for listening to the Freedom Report podcast, and I hope you all have a wonderful and miraculously free day.